Yeah, I'm going to talk about the golden xCOMPASS today. My name is Rahmadi. I'm with Comcast Cybersecurity and Privacy Research. And yeah, speaking about privacy, I know OWASP LASCON is all about security, but here we go, right? We have to talk about privacy whatsoever. So thinking about privacy, right, here's one way of thinking about it. Let's imagine we go to a medical doctor, right? And then in the session with the doctor, usually the doctor is going to ask a bunch of questions, right? Do you have this symptom, that symptom, this symptom? Oh, okay. Depending on the answers, we're getting some clue about what's happening with our body, right? With our health, right? For example, you're having A, right? So along those lines, I'm proposing to you that we can also think about privacy this way when we're trying to help developers. We create a list of questions, right? And depending on the answers to those questions, we can say that, hey, you're missing this thing about privacy, or you're missing that thing about privacy, right? And so, speaking about development, right, developers, we can think about this, right? We know that development follows this process that's called SDL, right? Software Development Lifecycle. And we go from design, we design the application, we come up with a plan, we try to develop it, and then finally we try to maintain it, right, with alpha, beta, version 1, version 2, right? And then this is like continuous integration, continuous development, right, CI/CD, all the way through and through. And in recent years, right, in addition to security, right, that we're talking a lot about in this conference, we should talk a lot more about privacy as well, because it's becoming very important, right, in recent years. Why? Because of the trend that modern applications collect more and more data. And privacy is so nuanced, right? I'm just showing a few acronyms, right? CCPA is the California Consumers Protection Act, right? It's a law that's passed in California. It's probably the best that we have in the US right now, I would argue that, because we don't have that protection at the federal level, unfortunately, not yet, right? There's something that's called ADPPA, but it's not yet passed, unfortunately. GDPR is the global General Data Protection Regulation in Europe, right? So it's trying to protect the entire European Union. COPPA is for children, HIPAA is for health, although it's a bit outdated because it's more than 20 years old. And this is why I'm trying to argue with you and trying to convince you that privacy is also something that's very important. And privacy is not equal to security, right? We can say that whenever there's a data leak, data breach, that means a privacy issue. That's not always the case, right? It's very nuanced. Even when we're collecting data legally and it's compliant with the law, it can still be a privacy issue, right? Which we're going to see in a moment, hopefully. And here, privacy, right, I'm just going to define it as data collection and handling. That's a simple definition of it, which can mean data collection, right? The top of it is we're collecting data from the users, right? We store the data. We're supposed to allow the users to modify the data as well, make some modification. Can be the case that in the beginning when user inputs the data, there's something wrong or something that's a typo, for example. And there's also an obligation to allow the users to delete their data and to pay attention to data retention as well, right? In short, we cannot store the data from the users forever, right? And so, right, I'm trying to argue here that privacy is very important, right? Unfortunately, it's hard to identify privacy requirements, right, for an application. And as I mentioned, it's very nuanced, right? Even if everything is figured out completely, right? Today, it's compliant with this law and that law. It's respecting the privacy of the users. Tomorrow, right, when we're trying to expand the application with some new data collection, it might not be compliant anymore, right? It's kind of similar when we're updating security, right, from TLS2 to TLS3, right? But even further, this is not just about like version update, right? The situation, the condition in the society, and so on and so forth, right? What we're collecting One data type might be more sensitive than other data types, right? And for certain age group, that can be okay to be collected. For other age groups, it might not be okay to be collected, right? And here, so there are at least 3 challenges that I can share when it comes to identifying privacy requirements for an application, right? So the first one, the initial assessment can be faster, right? So developers, I was a developer too in the past, and I feel that this is not something that's straightforward. It takes time to build the knowledge, right, as a developer. And as a developer, we have to consult with privacy experts, legal team, right, meetings, discussions, brainstormings, right? So it takes time, right, months, even years to build that knowledge, right, on privacy. And secondly, right, since it is a process, we see that it can be more preemptive, right? Since it's taking time, right, meetings, discussions take time. Sometimes, right, the privacy issues from the design phase, it can trickle down to like mid or full development, right? At that point, it becomes a privacy risk, right? It becomes a threat. So what we're trying to do is, hopefully, right, the hope is privacy by design, but instead it becomes a threat at that point, right? And at that point, when a developer has developed that application, maybe midway or even when it's completed, then there might be code changes that are too big to perform, right? And finally, we see here an opportunity to link the requirements with principles, right? I'm talking about frameworks. I don't know if some of you might be familiar with Linden, for example. Try to like threat model the system, right, on the side of privacy. And privacy laws as well, right, to ensure compliance at the same time. And so with these 3 challenges, we tried to think about this, and that's how we came up with xCOMPASS, right? To address the 3 challenges, right, we tried to identify privacy requirements with xCOMPASS. So xCOMPASS tries to address the 3 challenges in the following ways, right? The first, it's an immediate assessment through a user-friendly questionnaire, right? I'm saying user-friendly because one, as a developer, does not have to have all the privacy knowledge acquired first, right? User-friendly in the sense that it's just a yes/no answer that's needed. For example, does the application code contain personal information? Yes or no, right? And then based on the answers to these questions, right, it's going to give some advice, and it's going to determine whether there's something about privacy that's missing in the design. And secondly, it tries to be preemptive as well, right? So we recommend that it's used at the design phase during SDL, but it can be used anytime, really, right? Integrated into your CI/CD pipeline, for example, right? Try to ask the questions like at different stages of the application development, right? But at the design phase, we are trying to look into how we can integrate some of those privacy design strategies, right, into the design of the application before they become threats or risks. And finally, right, with respect to principles, right, we try to also link all those requirements with principles. Right now, this is released as an open source code that I'm going to share in a bit. It's linked with FIPS, right, Fair Information Practice Principles. There are 9 categories of them. They're released by the US federal government a few years ago. And it's also having some mapping to Linden categories as well. We're going to see in a bit. And this is the demo. I'm going to pause here for a bit. If there's any questions, comments, thoughts, feel free to. We're a small group, so.
So when you said Linden, what is that?
Okay, all right. Right, so this is xCOMPASS, by the way. I'm going to answer your question in a bit. We have put it on the CISA website, right? This is a federal agency that's helping the cybersecurity community across the US for cybersecurity and resilience. It's also listed on NIST, right? You can find it here as well. And this is the GitHub page, right? You can find more information here. And this is the questionnaire and the answer to that question, right? So I mentioned FIPS down here, right? The 9 categories. And then inside here, right, there is Linden categories. So I'm assuming everybody might be familiar with Stride, PASTA. No? Maybe. So Linden is a tool, a framework that's used for threat modeling on the privacy side. Stride is for security, mostly. I can, Linden, I'm not advertising them, but yeah, they're like, we know Linden people as well, so we work together, kind of. We'll see if it opens. It's for privacy threat modeling, right? Stride is for security threat modeling, I believe. And xCOMPASS is primarily for, not for threat modeling, but for shifting the threat modeling to the beginning, right? To the design phase. So with the questions, we're trying to help people, right? Think about privacy issues. And maybe it's better if we just take a look at
Can you show us some threat scenarios that you have written using this framework?
It's not threat scenarios, but we have tested this on an application. So say we have a meeting with an application developer, and then we walk through the questions according to the specification of the application.
Okay, but the result of threat modeling should be some threat scenarios, right? That you deliver to like CISO or anyone else, or developers to fix the issues.
Right. So this is before threat modeling, right? Normally, when we design the application, when we have the specification of the application, like we know, for example, does the application code contain personal information?
You are focusing on vulnerabilities because you told that, you know, Stride is a threat modeling framework.
Right.
But xCOMPASS, if it's a threat modeling framework, it's rather a checklist of vulnerabilities, right? Privacy-related vulnerabilities.
Yeah, something like checklist to identify the privacy requirements to avoid vulnerability.
But because Stride, the output of the Stride is a bunch of threat scenarios.
Right, right, yes, yes. I see where you're coming from. Yeah, so we're trying to avoid those vulnerabilities, right, by coming with the requirements, right? So on the security side, right, to avoid having like plain text issues, right, we will want to encrypt it, right? So we're coming with the encryption in the beginning, right?
And do you have any overlap with OWASP ASVS, Application Security Verification Standard?
I believe probably, right? There's something about the security side, like how we have to secure the server, for example, right?
For example, there are some items in OWASP ASVS that it talks about encryption of data.
Right.
Like at field level, like DB level.
Right. There's something about encryption down, yeah, and some of the questions, yes, about encryption. Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, so I'm just going to walk through the questions, and together, this is like, if you want to download it now, if you have your laptop, feel free to do so. Right? Just type xCOMPASS, Comcast, GitHub. It's available there. You can just git clone it or just download it directly as a zip file. And you can find the spreadsheet there. For example here, right? Does the application code contain personal information? Surprisingly, this happens sometimes, right? We put secrets or personal information in the code itself, which is not supposed to happen. So we answered yes. Then this is just Excel formula, right, that I'm using, right, to encourage a user to look at the design strategy. For example, the existence of PI is not a threat, right? But there's this encouragement, right, to check the code, right, in terms of PI, right? we're hoping not to put any PI in the code. Number two, right? Do any databases used by the application contain personal information? Any comments? Probably. Yeah. Yeah, so say yes. So yeah, check and then make sure that it's secured and so on and so forth. The advice here is if the application has personal information, has it been reviewed by the identification team, right? So the hope here is if it contains personal information in the database, the advice here is to de-identify that PI, right? So for example, don't store the date of birth entirely. Maybe like mask some of the digits, right? Similar thing with SSN, for example, right? Or bank account.
What about homomorphic encryptions?
Sure, yes. But then it's heavy on the server side, right? For the computation. Next, do any application logs contain personal information? Sometimes we print out stuff, right, into the log, right, just to debug the application. And then we totally forget to remove that logging, right? And it becomes a vulnerability in this case, where more like on the privacy side, right? It's probably not a security issue, but we're leaking some PI in the log, right? Biometric data, right? It's probably adhering to the law, right, that we collect biometric data. But then the advice here is, does the application collect biometric data? If yes, please complete a PIA, right? Privacy identification assessment. And review with privacy legal, right? So the legal department to make sure that this is adhering to the policy of the company and also the privacy laws, right? Biometric data we know might be fingerprints, right? That's probably okay to collect, but then how do we treat the fingerprint data, right? Iris scanning, maybe. And nowadays, right, with the sensors on our mobile phone, right, it's becoming trickier, right? I came across some research results, right, regarding sensors. It turns out that sensors data can also be identifying, right? So that's why I said in the beginning that privacy is very nuanced, right? It might seem that sensors are fine to collect the data, right? But then at the end of the day, it might be identifying, right? If you remember the case January 6th, right, the attack to the Capitol, right? Some of the attackers were identified using their sensor data, meaning I think that's the mobile data, right? When they're traveling from here to there, like, so that's actually a privacy issue, right? They're not supposed to be known, right, by people, right? But unfortunately, right, with the sensor data collection, this becomes a privacy concern, right? Next, children data, right? So some data that are okay to be collected from adults, it turns out that it's not okay to be collected from children. But guess what, right? Say we're logging into a website, right? Even before logging in, you can try this on your website, try to collect the data. It turns out that they're collecting data from us, right? Even before logging in. So they don't know actually whether it's a child or an adult, right? This is a privacy concern as well, right? Although the law actually, right, many laws I think, including CCP and GDPR, they mandate that application can collect data from youth, or actually, sorry, from people not under 16, right? So adults, right? 17 and above. CP&I, this is also some personal information, a data type, right? We have to review this with legal as well. Voice and video, right? Nowadays, this is becoming very sensitive. I was just talking with somebody about deep fake, right? So Be careful also with voice and video data. I did some experiment with my own voice data. I could train a model using just 20 minutes or 30 minutes of data, of voice data. And then I could crack my own bank account, right? Maybe some of you are familiar with the voice password, right? So this is also something that's sensitive. And next, right, are changes to application code attributed and logged, right? Now this section talks about logging, right? Logging the changes and things that we do to the code, like components, like database, servers, are they logged, right? And we can answer this yes, right? If we're using GitHub, for example, everything is logged there, all the changes, the push, the pulls, right? And is access to personal information across your application logged, right? This is also important, right? To identify who has access to that application, to that information, right? Is access control applied here, right? So maybe the developer can access the data when they're testing the application, but then how about other users, right? Can there be access control that's missed here, right? Next, is there a way to download data out of the application? Now this is important as well. The expected answer is yes, right? Because we're hoping that that data right is respected on the user side, right? When you and me are submitting data to a website, right? We're hoping that we can get access to that data, right? After we submit that data, right? For example, through a form, right? Because then, well, some privacy laws actually mandate this, that we are given that data right to download our own data, right, from the website. And this is also about logging that access. And next, can we track who is viewing that personal information, right? Again, this is about access control, right? Not everyone can get access to our personal information. And this is about, the next section is about data quality, integrity. Does your application combine customer data across different platforms, right? And nowadays, when we talk about an application, we have the mobile version, we have the TV version. So smart TV has apps too. The laptop, web-based, right, or desktop version. And to make it worse, right, we have the apps on voice assistants as well, right? We can call the application, right, by voice. And then to make it even worse, there is VR apps, right? Have you ever tried Netflix on VR? No, nobody? It's pretty cool. Like you watch it as if you were in a cinema, right? But virtually. So Netflix, for example, it has the VR version, it has the smart TV version, it has the Android version, iOS, of course, right? It's just missing the voice assistant version. So the problem here is we want to separate, there's data separation principle or data minimization principle. So we're hoping not to combine customer data from different sources all in the same place for security concerns and for privacy concern as well, right? And next, do you check the quality of personal data used by the application, right? As I mentioned before, there might be errors, typos, right, or incomplete information in the beginning. So we're hoping that development actually involves checking or verifying the quality of the data. Next, there's something about inferences about a customer that can result in a negative impact, such as denial of service. Say the app is set with an AI model, right, to infer something about ourselves, right? Does this person do this, for example? And if the model infers that the person is this way, then it might deny a service, right? Which is something that we don't want to have. Does your application collect location data or other proxies for location data that can be linked to a user or group in any way? So this goes back to the January 6th example, right? So tracking of location data. This is very concerning. There's a research paper that I'm aware of. It actually reveals that we can be identified using just 2 or 3 data points of our location, right? Because our smartphone actually tells a lot about the locations that we visit, right? 3 places, you can be identified, right? This is this person, person A, this is person B. And the next one, do you collect customers' behavioral data, right? Like websites they visit, number of clicks, likes, engagement, that can reveal user patterns, right? This is going a step further, not just location, but everything, right? I mentioned about sensors, right? This is about the visit, the clicks, the likes, engagements, right? This is all going to identify us, right? Person A versus person B. Through cookies on the website, for example, right? Now, this is specific to data minimization, right? Is your application collecting only the minimum data necessary for the app to function, right? And by the way, if you see that I colored this part with gray color, which means that they're compound. It's a set of questions that you have to answer, as a group, right? As a cluster. So is your application collecting only minimum data necessary? For example, we answered no. It's not a concern. But then if you see here, the expected answer should be yes, and the next should be NA, and then yes. Or no, yes, and yes, right? So if it's not collecting minimum data, then there's a second question. If not, have you documented the reason for collecting additional personal information? Say yes, right? So we're safe, right? We're okay. By default, we have to make it collect data as minimal as possible, right? An application, only for the functionality. But we understand that some companies, they make money out of advertising, right? That's why they're collecting, or based on personalization, right? Like it personalizes the service for you and me, right? So we see the items that we would love to see, right? In terms of videos maybe, or songs, or and things like that. And finally, right, is data disposal done for data that is no longer required by the application, right? This is very, very important, right? I mentioned about data retention. So we're not supposed to design an application that keeps the customer data forever, right? What if the customer passed away, right? Should the server keep the data forever? I don't think so, right? There's some ongoing research on how we can be forgotten, right, by the data collection activity, right? After we're no longer existing, of course, right? So we say yes. Then we satisfy the privacy requirements for this, right? If the application is customer-facing, is the information that a customer can view provided on a need-to-know basis? We're hoping yes, right? So it's becoming not an issue, right? This is, again, about access control. So yeah, there's many more questions here, but I guess I wouldn't be covering all of them, right? And I encourage you to check out the GitHub. Feel free to to email me as well. And as a parting thought here, in summary, I would just highlight that xCOMPASS is a tool that is meant to help developers identify privacy requirements, hopefully early, easily, and quickly. So feel free to connect with me, right? Or just search xCOMPASS Comcast GitHub. It's all there, right? Contact info and everything else. And yeah, thank you so much for your attention. And I'll be happy to take any more questions if there's any.
How would you relate that to like an assessment on those NIST frameworks?
Right, good question. I would say I haven't really dabbled with that assessment from NIST, right? But then I'm aware of it. And I would say it's a very long document, right? What we're trying to do here is to make privacy simpler, right, with just a set of questions. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of overlap with the NIST document. And we're hoping that with a simpler way of assessing privacy on the application side, this would encourage developers to think more about privacy and to integrate the privacy way of thinking when they're designing the application. Yep. Have a great weekend.